Hello and welcome to Business Daily from the BBC World Service, the business podcast which brings you the trends, the money and the people who make the world and its money go round. Podcasts from the BBC World Service are supported by advertising.
With no fees or minimums on checking and savings accounts, banking with Capital One is like the easiest decision in the history of decisions. Kind of like choosing to listen to another episode of your favorite podcast. And with our top-rated app, you can deposit checks and transfer money anytime, anywhere, making Capital One an even easier decision. That's banking reimagined. What's in your wallet? Terms apply. Capital One N.A., member FDIC.
Hello and welcome to Business Weekly with Lucy Burton. Today we'll be looking at why one of the poorest countries in Latin America, El Salvador, decided to make Bitcoin legal tender. We'll also find out what happened when the cryptocurrency crashed on the first day it was rolled out. In a few weeks' time, the matriarch of European politics, the German Chancellor Angela Merkel, will step down. We'll hear what issues are playing on the minds of German voters as they get ready to head to the polls. And for years, Lamu, Kenya's ancient trading port, has been in decline. But the government hopes the opening of a new deep-sea port means that it can be a commercial superstar once more. But we'll begin the programme further inland in Nairobi, where COVID curfews have been extended due to a rise in cases. Nearly 5,000 people have died of the disease in Kenya since the pandemic began, and the vaccination programme has been slow. And whilst case numbers have been lower than in other countries, the economic impact has been huge. My colleague Vivian Nunes has been hearing how some Kenyans have been affected.
Like much of sub-Saharan Africa, the official numbers here in Kenya suggest the country has escaped the worst of the coronavirus. Even so, there are around 700 new cases reported every day, and there have been nearly 5,000 COVID deaths since the outbreak began. In the early stages of the pandemic, strict lockdowns were put in place, and there is still an overnight curfew. The economic impact of those measures has been enormous, especially on the millions of workers who make up Kenya's informal economy. Street vendors, house cleaners, restaurant staff and others suddenly found themselves sent home from work, often with zero financial support. The situation for many was dire. Among them was Josephine Malchiwa.
My friend sent me some little money, so I bought the food that I've been using. Now I'm out of the food. Now money is the problem. Even right now, they have not slept. They are just saying, "Mommy, we want to eat." Now I'm wondering, what will I give them to eat? I'm feeling so sad. I'm really just regretting my life.
We wanted to hear how things are going now, 18 months after we first got in touch with Josephine. So I paid her a visit at her house in Kibera, Nairobi's densely packed informal settlement of only a few square kilometres that an estimated 250,000 people call home. I caught up with the BBC's Michael Kaloki, who's based in Nairobi, and he showed me around.
Kibera is Kenya's largest informal settlement. Kibera basically has people who live here from different parts of Kenya. A lot of people came here hoping to find work. Rent is cheap here. And they also have maybe family members who've come and settled in Kibera. So people from rural areas coming here looking for work in the city, some of them getting work in the factories, in people's homes, and others also opening up their own businesses. But, Kibera does have its challenges as well, and one of them is that there is people living in extreme poverty here. The infrastructure here is not very well set up, I should say. So, for example, when there are fires here in Kibera, you often find that houses burn down without the fire service being able to get to them because there are no roads. Also issues, for example, sanitation is a challenge. No water, running water in many areas, and people have to go sometimes long distances to fetch water. As well, in some parts, crime is a problem in some parts of Kibera as well. The economic situation even before the pandemic was a challenge for many. A lot of people making less than $1 a day, working perhaps menial jobs within Kibera and also outside Kibera. Now the pandemic really just made things that much worse. Here in Kibera, there are maybe I'd say hundreds of people who are working out in the factories, within the city, in hotels as well, working in people's homes. And many of those lost their jobs, and they just ended up having to stay home. So the pandemic has really hit hard. But I have to say that even with that particular challenge, you find that people here became really innovative and came up with businesses. However, this was another challenge as well for some of them, is that access to finance. They lost their jobs. They go to the banks will not give them loans because they don't have jobs in the first place, and many of them did not have savings. A number of people had to leave Kibera because they couldn't afford their rent and went back to their rural homes to stay with their families there.
One of those people who has faced many of those challenges you've mentioned over the past year is Josephine Muchilu. Let's go and see how she's getting on now.
Okay, let's take a walk.
Hi, Josephine.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm fine.
Very nice to meet you. And who's this little one?
This is the young one.
What's his name?
He's Nizar.
Nizar?
Yes.
Josephine lives in a one-room house with plastic sacking on mud walls and a corrugated tin roof. A curtain divides the space in two. In the back of the house, there's a bed where Josephine sleeps with her two younger children. The older two sleep on a mattress in the front.
My name is Shamim Yusuf. I am 11 years.
Like so many Kenyans, Josephine lost her job in the early days of the pandemic.
So before the coronavirus, I used to be a cook in a certain school. Okay. Then when corona came, the schools were closed down.
It was demolished to make way for a new railway line, leaving Josephine without a job when schools reopened. She was able to open a small fruit and vegetable stand, a kiosk. But with so many of her neighbours in Kibera also losing their jobs, Josephine found few customers.
The people were there, but they didn't have the incomes. So eventually my business ran down and it was closed.
Making matters worse, Josephine's kiosk was also in the way of the new railway construction. It too was demolished. Did you get any compensation?
No. We didn't have any compensation up to now.
But when times were particularly tough, she borrowed from different moneylenders, and now she's left with a substantial debt. How much money do you still owe?
Now 22,000. That is what I'm remaining with, and also the school fees for next term for the children.
So you owe moneylenders 22,000 shillings?
Yeah. Every month it increases, the interest increases. So now when clearing the tax, I'll end up paying even 35,000 or even 38,000 because they are too expensive.
That's nearly $350. So what can Josephine do? Well, ever resourceful, she underwent a tailoring course with the hope of one day owning her own clothing business. How did you come up with that idea? How did you decide to try seamstress training?
My kids' uniforms used to turn. Now I take it to the tailor. It is too expensive. Even myself, it is too expensive to make a garment. Now I sat down and said, no, I should know how to make the clothes instead of giving so huge money to the tailors to make for me the clothes.
So we've just arrived at a business here in Kibera. It's painted bright green and it says Mama Esther Tailoring and Dressmaking.
When Mama Esther is free, I come, she treats me well.
So I'm going to start cutting. This one I'm going to make a skirt and a blouse, and the other one I'm going to make a dress, which is very smart, like this one.
Mama Esther is training Josephine voluntarily, but she too has struggled to make ends meet during the pandemic.
Since the pandemic, the business has gone down, very down. Most of the people doesn't have money to come to make the clothes. They were depending on their jobs for them to get money, but when they came outside, they have no money even to get food. It was hard for them. So because of that, they weigh between making new clothes and doing what? And getting food. So they take the basic needs first.
Mama Esther there, who's been working with Josephine and helping her learn the skills she needs to become a tailor. Josephine is one of many Kenyans who found themselves quickly needing an alternative income stream in March 2020. Hassan is a 26-year-old from Kibera. He used to be a waiter in a Nairobi Chinese restaurant. He told me about the multiple businesses he's launched since losing his job last year.
I had some skills. I used to do some art, making jewelry for ladies. So I launched that business. Since it can't pay my rent, I had to put another idea. So I started selling fruits. Sometimes you can get a loss because you don't have a fridge. So I decided to put sausages because most of the people in this hood love eating snacks. So I launched that business of sausages. Then I had to boost with coffee. So I'm doing okay. Since I have my hustle.
Sausage seller Hassan in Kibera. The hustle Hassan talks about is something that many Kenyans understand. Finding a way to earn money through a small business venture is part of life for millions of people here and across Africa. And for many, that has meant migrating from the rural areas to the big city. In Kenya, there's been a perception at least that moving to Nairobi will bring the kind of economic opportunity that just isn't possible in the countryside. But that belief is starting to change, and some of those who found themselves forced out of the city when the pandemic struck have realised there just might be another way to make a living that doesn't involve mass migration to urban centres. Meet Farmer Jack.
I'm Jacob Ugoro Nyango from Nyakach in Kisumu County. I used to be in Nairobi and I worked as a panel beater. I moved back home in 2020 July. There was nowhere to get money even to pay rent and to feed myself and my young family at home. At home, there was no rent, there was no electricity bill and water bills, as compared to Nairobi where everything was money-oriented. So I started just some farming in these indigenous veggies and tomatoes. Right now I'm harvesting most of the veggies, so I'm good. The money I'm getting from what I'm doing now compared to what I was doing, what I'm getting now is much more compared to what I used to work for in Nairobi. My eldest daughter is 16 years old. I used to see them once a year. In fact, Corona has been a blessing to me.
COVID-19 caught everybody by surprise.
Chris Makolu is the Africa Director for the International Development Organisation, World Neighbours.
Most of the people were laid off because they live from hand to mouth. Most of them were not able to, first, pay the rent, and secondly, feed themselves. Most of them have their families, in the rural areas. So they normally send them money. So they couldn't feed themselves, they couldn't pay rent, they couldn't, send money to their families. So some of them, quite a number, migrated from cities back to their rural areas.
And as Chris says, the countryside has been a lifeline for many.
As you know, in Africa, we are children of two worlds. We have one leg in the city, another one in the countryside. It helped because if at all they didn't have that, they would have really been in serious trouble. So it's a strategy that worked very, very well. They had to move back to the villages. And when they reached there, those who had some skills tried to find if they could get jobs. But again, because the economy was really negatively affected, it was very difficult to begin to practice their job or to get employed. Food was a very, very important thing because certain areas in Kenya are food insecure. So they're relying on some vegetables, some fresh vegetables, tomatoes, to come from other counties. But because the government had put a ban on transportation, people began to think how they can survive. And then they realized that they could even grow some of these things for themselves, if not for sale. Kitchen gardening. And this is one thing that World Neighbours is very strong in, because we have always been training the people that we work with to ensure that they have a kitchen garden, particularly indigenous vegetables, which are very nutritious. So some of them began to support their families to do that, and also to grow a little bit more that neighbours could actually come and buy.
So have things changed for the better in some areas? Has COVID-19 essentially revived some rural economies?
Reverse migration has changed, or is beginning to change, the local development of the rural areas. It was known initially that for you to get a job, you must go, salaried job, or to get money, you must migrate to the city. But they are beginning to realize that they can actually make ends meet without necessarily coming to big cities, but working from their homes.
Do you think there's a bit of a myth about people in Kenya? They see this myth surrounding Nairobi. They're going to make it big. They're going to earn lots of money, or at least have a better life than they would have had in the village, in the countryside. Do you think that's changing now? People can see that they can have a life in these areas.
This is the second phenomenon in Kenya that has made people to think or to reevaluate that myth about everything being rosy in the city. During the post-election violence in 2007, 2008, there's a lot of violence in cities, so most people also went back to the countryside. They had lost their jobs, and then they had begun to do, try to see if they can survive there. Now, hardly 10 years later, COVID comes on and has even, strengthened the idea that, people need to think about other alternatives instead of thinking that, life can only be nice in the cities.
You're seeing perhaps a silver lining, an unexpected change in social dynamics, in economic behaviour from the COVID-19 pandemic that you've welcomed.
Very much. Like they say, there's a silver lining in every cloud. Nobody knew that, there are some positive things that, would come out of the pandemic. We didn't expect it came, and I think we should take advantage of it and try to strengthen that.
Chris Makolu, the Africa Director for the International Development Organisation World Neighbours, ending that report by Vivienne Nunes. This week, El Salvador became the first country in the world to recognise the cryptocurrency Bitcoin as legal tender. Businesses are obliged, where possible, to accept Bitcoin as payment. The alternative is the US dollar, which is the country's other official currency. President Nayib Bukele said the move would fuel the economy and make it easier for Salvadorans abroad to send money home.
People who send and receive remittances know the commissions and the high costs that have to be paid to send them. And in the case of these remittances, this will benefit those who send and receive the money. Millions of people will benefit from not having to pay high prices and commissions, and also because they'll receive the funds immediately.
But on the first day the cryptocurrency was introduced, it crashed. Bitcoin fell to its lowest point in nearly a month, leading an opposition politician to say the country lost $3 million. And because the price of Bitcoin is so volatile, the IMF and the World Bank have expressed doubts about the project. But Mike Peterson, the director at Bitcoin Beach, which set up a pilot project in El Salvador, disagrees.
For most of the people in this community, they don't have access to bank accounts. They don't have access to payment apps like a lot of us do in the U.S. or in Europe. And so this was them bringing them kind of into the digital world. They were able to now make online payments. They're able to send money back and forth to family members, even hundreds of miles away. And they're able to do all this with very low or almost non-existent fees.
The government has even given Salvadorans $30 each of Bitcoin to encourage its adoption, but not everyone is convinced.
People don't want it. That coin is unstable. There is no price fixing.
Our elderly people find it very difficult to use the technology needed for this virtual coin.
I don't like it. I like going to the shops and using banknotes.
In fact, a survey by the Central American University found less than 5% of the 1,000-odd who took part understood what Bitcoin was. 68% of them thought it was a bad idea. My colleague Jamie Robertson spoke to John Danihi, a journalist based in El Salvador. He'd just got back from a cafe in the capital. But did he pay with Bitcoin?
I think I happened to have been speaking with the owner of the cafe. So he told me, well, the Chivo wallet, the government-supported wallet, they were having some issues with it. He took out his phone and he had just his own personal wallet, and he allowed me to pay him personally in Bitcoin.
How popular is it proving to be then?
So this cafe owner, for example, today was the first day that he used Bitcoin. He had never used it before. He was excited to use it today, but he was still learning about it and getting his bearings. So I think most of the population here is relatively unfamiliar with Bitcoin, to say the least. And while there are some people in favor, it seems most people are taking a wait-and-see approach.
Why is the government doing this at the moment?
One reason which the president often cites is that almost a quarter of the GDP is remittances. A lot of Salvadorians that live in Europe or the United States, they send money home. And because that makes such a significant percent of the GDP, then if they could just save, Bitcoin will allow them to save on transaction costs. And more than the transaction costs, it will also allow people to accept these payments anytime, 24 hours a day, any place. A lot of times people that live in rural communities, they have to take half a day off work to go into the city to receive these payments. Besides that, they dollarized in 2001. And especially in the last couple of years, every time that the United States, they have quantitative easing or they just have more stimulus packages, then the people of El Salvador don't get any of the benefits of that. They don't have any say in U.S. dollar policy. But if there is inflation, if there is any negative consequences, then they feel that.
It's legal tender now. That's the technical term. What does that mean? Does that mean that a business has to accept payment in Bitcoin if somebody comes up and uses a wallet in order to buy, I don't know, anything from a car to a sandwich?
Everyone who is able to must accept Bitcoin. So it's carved out a space for a lot of exceptions. So if it's a small merchant, they don't have a cell phone, they don't have the means to accept it, then they're exempt from it. But if it's a larger business, there's a lot of American fast food here, for example. So if it's a Burger King or a McDonald's that's down here, they do need to accept it. They would have to accept both dollars and Bitcoin.
Let's get to the nub of this, because it's a very volatile currency. I mean, just in this first day, the price went, I think, from about $56,000, something like that, for one Bitcoin down to $42,000. I mean, it's extraordinarily volatile. Now, how does that work if I have a business and I buy something in dollars and I want to, or I end up selling it in Bitcoin? I mean, what's that going to do to my profit and loss? I'm just not going to know one moment I'll be in profit, the next moment I'll be in loss.
So one thing that the government has done to try to mitigate that is the wallet that they have, the Chivo wallet, you could hold either Bitcoin or US dollars. So for example, if I wanted to pay in Bitcoin, they could receive dollars. So the wallet allows you to swap back and forth between the two. So if someone doesn't want to be exposed to that volatility and I want to pay in Bitcoin, they could accept the Bitcoin but hold it as dollars in their wallet. If they're happy to accept that volatility, then they could hold it in Bitcoin, but it's up to the end user.
How sophisticated are El Salvadorians in terms of this whole idea of digital currency, which many people can't get their heads about, anywhere in the world?
There's this one community on the Pacific coast, El Zante, which has been using Bitcoin for 2 years. It's pretty widely accepted in this village. That was kind of like a trial project for the rest of the country. And in El Zante, which I've been to, most people have wrapped their head around the concept of Bitcoin. Where in San Salvador, where I am now, it's very new. So a lot of people are curious, but there's not very deep knowledge that most people possess about it. Most people have never used Bitcoin in this country, and most people don't know very much about it. And there is concern among a significant percent of the population that things are happening perhaps too quickly, that they want some more time to learn about it, to adjust to it. From the people that I've spoken to that don't like this Bitcoin adoption, it seems the primary reason is because they feel like they didn't have a say in the process and that it's happening too quickly.
John Danihi speaking to the BBC's Jamie Robertson. After the break, we'll hear from the boss of the world's most sold language app. Back with you soon. Hello and welcome back to Business Weekly with Lucy Burton. For the last 16 years, Angela Merkel has led Germany. During her chancellorship, she's worked with 4 US presidents, navigated a global financial crisis, a European debt crisis, and now a pandemic. But in 2 weeks' time, Germans will vote for a new chancellor. And the big issue that will affect their choice at the polls? Climate change. Rob Young looks at the environmental pledges made by the leading candidates for the top job.
2 weeks ago, Germany held a remembrance service for the victims of July's heavy rainfall and devastating floods that swept through towns and villages in the country's west. More than 180 people were killed. One of the worst affected areas was the Ahr Valley. Daniel Koller helped set up a fund to assist local businesses affected by the flooding. His family's restaurant was destroyed.
It was a nice little place, nice little restaurant in the heart of the Ahr Valley in the Altstadt. which is totally destroyed and in a historical building which will not be able to rebuild again. So we have to build it up at another place again.
You're not keeping the restaurant there, you're going to move it entirely to somewhere else?
Yeah. At this place, the restaurant is not being able to rebuild. We have to move it somewhere else.
Generally, businesses take several years before they start to make a profit. The first few years are incredibly expensive and they tend to lose money. So financially, it must have been devastating.
Well, I think the most devastating thing is that these floodings, they just came a few weeks after reopening and getting better from COVID-19. Then the floodings came. That's basically the double disaster.
What kind of help do businesses in the area need from the government to ensure that they can rebuild from this devastating flood? And I suppose that they aren't flooded in this way again.
Our wish to politics and to the governmental organizations is to create a binding precedent of what happened here in Ahrweiler for disaster control in Germany, not just here, but everywhere, because things like this, catastrophes, and also weather-related catastrophes, they will come more often.
Daniel Koller in Germany's Ahr Valley. The flooding has pushed climate change to the heart of the election campaign. It's an issue voters rank as the most crucial, along with coronavirus. This is what people in Berlin have been telling us about how important the subject is to them.
I think climate change is a very important issue, but I think it's far too late to do anything about it, and I don't think anything will change. They're just talking slogans. They're doing far too little.
Sehr, sehr wichtig. Very, very important. The most important thing ever, that question. And politicians in general are doing far too little about climate change, against the threat of climate catastrophe.
Drohende Klimakatastrophe.
They
support the fact that it's getting worse. The politicians pass a climate package, but actually the rules are being softened instead of tightened. We have to face it. It's going to be a little bit more uncomfortable for everybody. There won't be anything.
Oder es wird nichts.
Es ist für mich wichtig, aber es ist auch wichtig.
It's important, but as a German living in Germany, you contribute very little. Even the German nation with its weird climate goals. German politicians in particular are even doing too much because they're trying to stop climate change from within Germany, which is impossible.
Aus Deutschland heraus zu stoppen, was unmöglich ist.
Germany's dominant political force for almost 2 decades, Angela Merkel, is stepping down at this election. That makes this race special and unpredictable. Polls suggest the centre-left Social Democrats are just ahead of Merkel's conservative CDU-CSU bloc. These parties are currently in power in a grand coalition. The Conservatives are pretty much level in the polls with the Greens, a party that has seen its popularity rise in recent years. A coalition of 2, perhaps 3 parties seems likely. In the first of several televised election debates, the 3 frontrunners to be the next Chancellor discussed various issues on RTL television, and climate change was a key area. They all promised to set Germany off on the path towards carbon neutrality, where the country no longer emits more greenhouse gases than it captures. But all of the parties' climate policies have to be set against the backdrop of a constitutional court ruling that said Parliament must lay out much more detail about how Germany will reduce carbon emissions by 2030 and then become carbon neutral by 2050. Karen Pittel is a professor of economics at the University of Munich who specialises in energy and climate.
In the climate law, we had, until 2030, a lot of details about which sector should reduce how much by which point in time. But from 30 to 50, there was basically nothing. And the Constitutional Court said there is the danger that you postpone emission reductions too much until then you have to be really fast. And that might actually lead to cost for future generations that might infringe on their human rights, on their constitutional rights. And so that it really asks for more clarity, for more transparency. And then that court decision was taken in order to also move up the date until which climate neutrality, or in other terms, zero emissions, should be reached to 2045. I mean, it's all about the goals, though. I mean, in the climate law, there's not the measures. The measures, we're still waiting for.
Do any of the parties really have a plan to get Germany to where it has to be on climate?
No, not in my mind. I mean, I don't really see a strategy how to get to climate neutrality in either of the party programs, I'm afraid.
We'll return to Karen Pittel later. Whichever party or parties form a government, Germany's key industries will have to decarbonise over the coming decades. This week, the city of Munich hosted the International Motor Show, the annual glitzy jamboree that shows off car brands' latest vehicles. The industry is in a race against time to meet national and European Union emissions targets. The switch from diesel and petrol to electric is a huge challenge for the industry. Dr. Kurt Christian Schiel is Managing Director of the German Automotive Association.
This transformation is not a task for the auto industry alone. It is a task for the whole of society. Us, as the industry, we have to bring the products to the market. The products have to be competitive, they have to be attractive, and they have to find their customer. But it is also a task for the state, for authorities on a national but also on a European scale, particularly to manage a very, very rapid ramp-up of charging infrastructure. Nobody will buy an electric vehicle if he or she doesn't find charging infrastructure everywhere where he or she wants to go.
There has been criticism that some of the big German car makers had been late to embrace electric vehicle technology. What do you say to that criticism, and whether Germany will be able to retain its position as one of the world's main and most well-regarded car-making nations?
All German car producers are aggressively pursuing their agendas to electrify their fleets and to bring very attractive new electric cars to the markets. Of course, to develop good cars takes time, and I think that our members are very successful in that, and our intention is clearly to be at the top also on a worldwide scale and to be successful globally.
Dr. Kurt Christian Schiel from the German Association of the Automotive Industry. Whatever climate policies are introduced after the election, how dramatic might the change to the overall German economy be? Here's Dr. Karen Pittel again, a climate economist from the University of Munich.
At the moment, the German industry is doing quite well with respect to green technology, efficient technology, and also exporting that. We do have a lag, basically, in switching to, for example, electric cars, and we are still not as far, or we're not yet as far as we have to be in 2030 or 40 with respect to, for example, the chemical industry or the steel industry to reduce emissions or completely switch to carbon neutral technologies.
How much change will there have to be in the German economy, in the way that Germans go about their everyday lives? And is the state willing to pay for an awful lot of that, perhaps through something not massively popular in Germany, much higher borrowing?
The discussion has been much more focused on how to raise revenues in order to finance what has to be done. So, for example, like using revenues from carbon pricing, carbon taxation, carbon whatever, emission trading, in order to finance, for example, fostering green technologies.
So you're saying then that there is a conversation, you might say an honest conversation with voters, that this transition away from fossil fuels to a net zero carbon economy will cost?
No. Yes. There is some discussion on it. It's not honest enough in my sense. So I think you're pointing exactly in the right way. I don't think that there is an honest discussion about the overall level of the cost, or investment at least, that will be necessary to reach that. And also, so far, many of the parties before the election, they try to give an impression that you can more or less subsidize yourself until you're carbon free. I don't believe that. I think there has to be something in order to raise the revenue, but also to affect behavior more directly, which would mean that you actually not only reward, but you also punish certain behavior. There's also, I think, a kind of a dissociation in a way in perception that people are not aware that if there is so much subsidization that you actually need to raise the funds, for example, by increasing other types of taxes. The revenues from carbon pricing only go so far. You can't basically finance everything that you would like to finance according to the party programs.
Karen Patel, Professor of Economics at the University of Munich, ending that report by Rob Young. This week, the language learning app Babbel announced that they'll list on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange. The German company has sold over 10 million subscriptions, with users able to learn a variety of languages like English and Spanish to Indonesian and Dutch and Danish. But with lockdowns easing in some parts of the world, and with that less spare time, will the app stay popular? I caught up with its CEO, Arne Schepke, and began by asking him to describe how the app works.
Babbel was founded in 2007 when digital language learning didn't exist, and brought together the proven didactical theory, neurological learning theory with modern-day technology. And what the app really does is take you by the hand through a learning journey that takes you from A to Z and gets you conversational really, really fast. You get a range of content choices from the typical beginner's English or beginner's French type courses, and then also very specific ones which are designed for a career or for love or for literature. And you get to choose your motivations and your passions.
I love the idea that you can learn a language, especially for love. We'll get into that a little bit later. But to the business side of things first, you announced this week that you're going to go public. Just tell us why.
Yeah, so we did. We're planning to take the company public on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange, really because we've seen a strong dynamic and have delivered on being the quality leader in the digital language learning space, and see a good opportunity to feed that dynamic and keep on growing our user base and keep on investing into innovation, especially around our ecosystem approach, so surrounding our learners with more learning methods so that you have more stimuli that help you to learn faster and more successfully, as well as growing our B2B offering, so for business customers, especially business English around the world, which we're looking to expand. And it's a good opportunity to bring in the type of funding that's needed to expand these businesses and to improve and revolutionize how we learn languages worldwide.
And of course, you're listing in a year which has been, to put it very mildly, strange for all of us, very difficult for businesses with lockdowns and economic impact of COVID. How have you found the last couple of years? Because I suppose on one hand, you might have seen more subscribers as people have been stuck at home, or perhaps with the opportunity to travel diminishing, there's less incentive to learn a new language.
And I think we as a company and also as a team obviously went through the same phases that all of us went through, and I think to the day we would all wish for the last 1.5 COVID years not to have happened. After making sure that the team stays healthy and we could continue our services towards our learners, we very quickly saw that it's actually a really good sign that when we as human beings get gifted a bit of free time, at least some of us, after the first couple of TV series, we actually want to do something meaningful with our lives. And partially that meant language learning. And we saw a huge boost in demand, both from our existing learners. Learning activity doubled during first lockdown. Also, the new demand, so new customer revenue came in at 3x, 5x factors month by month, depending on the country during lockdowns. And we've actually seen that sustain over time. So, those who started actually were able to build a habit and saw language learning success along the road and were able to sustain their learning activity. And B, we've all now understood that digital learning actually works. We've all homeschooled our children. We've all been on Zoom calls or Skype calls. So we've all seen that digital solutions can work for us, and we don't need to explain to anyone that digital learning works.
Arne Schepke. Finally, we're going to head back to Kenya now, and more specifically to the port of Lamu. Looking out over the Indian Ocean, this enormous new construction project is being built by a Chinese company. And when it's completed, it'll be able to handle larger vessels than Kenya's main port of Mombasa, 350 miles to the south. But whilst the ancient port of Lamu is being touted as a new trade gateway to East Africa, some believe it's in danger of being sidelined before the deep sea port is even fully complete. Some say there are security concerns. Lamu is not very far from the border with Somalia, and the town has suffered attacks from Al-Shabaab militants in the past. Others say the construction is damaging the local environment and the old town of Lamu, which itself is a World Heritage Site. Vivienne Nunes went to take a look.
We're headed to berth number 1, and there are some towering cranes on the edge of the port here, ready to take containers. Some construction still going on at berth number 3. But the cost of these first 3 berths has already been $367 million. And there are going to be 32 berths by the end of the project. So that gives you some sense of the scale and cost of this ambitious infrastructure project. I'm here with
Dolly Okanga from Kenya Ports Authority.
Dolly, thank you for showing us around this brand new site. There's not a lot going on today. It's pretty empty because this is very early days for this project. Yes. So there's no ships here today, but in a few years, obviously, you're expecting this to be a bustling port with huge amounts of traffic coming in by sea. Oh, yes. But already you've had a few ships since the official opening a couple of months ago.
Yes, we've handled about 5 vessels. The last one we handled was last week, Monday, and we managed to load about 62 transshipment containers. So far, we are not complaining. We are happy that we have already handled that number of vessels, and we are looking forward to handling many more. In fact, the Lamu port will handle bigger vessels than Mombasa.
So you're obviously pretty excited about the potential of this project. Tell us what you think it can do for the region and for Kenya.
Well, what I'd say right now is, one, it has created employment, especially to the people of Lamu, and that makes us excited. And the fact that some of us are pioneers, to see it being constructed and to even be there while we go through the hardships, it makes us very excited to be people who will make it a better place, especially for Lamu, and for Kenya. Having this big port and the fact that we'll be able to handle Panamax, post-Panamax vessels, man, that is history.
This project, though, wasn't built by Kenyan workers as far as I know. It was built by a Chinese construction company.
Yes, it was. It is, well.
So did they bring in their workers from China, or did they hire locally?
They hire locally. Actually, they have their workers, but they also hire locally. Mainly, most of their labourers are locals.
And Dolly, tell us about some of the numbers behind this project then, because we know with a huge construction project like this, there's going to be a lot of big numbers. What do we know about the size of this project?
Okay, right now what I can say is each berth we have here is 400 meters long. And then, of course, we talked about the depth, which is 17.5 deep. Then in the yard, in one yard, we handle about 17,000 TEUs, which translates to 18,000 containers, 2 high. That means 2 levels high, one container above the other. We handle 18,000 containers in one yard.
Just on our left here, there are some Kenyan Defence Force Navy vessels. We're not allowed to take any pictures of them. It's quite sensitive. But obviously security is a consideration here. We're not far from the border with Somalia, and there is the threat there of Al-Shabaab, the jihadist terrorist group. Security must be on the minds of those operating this port.
Oh yes, in fact, we are very grateful to our country because right now security in Lamu is fantastic. It's been beefed up, and we actually feel secure to move around, to do business. Security is top-notch.
Because tell us what's happened in the past.
Well, we have the so-called Al-Shabaab who have been attacking on the roads and in some of the towns. But right now, it is very safe to travel by road. Right now, especially because the population is increasing, especially because of the opening of the port, businesses are coming up. So security has also been beefed up because of that, and it's more secure right now. Actually, we're even having a lot of tourists coming in, both local and international. So that tells already how safe the place is.
Is the idea then that these Navy vessels will permanently be stationed here at the port to maintain that level of security?
Yes, they will. In fact, they have their barracks not far from the port. So yes, they will be stationed here. So we have nothing to worry about, really.
Not everyone is convinced this project is worth the hefty price tag. Dr. Paul Goldsmith is an anthropologist who has lived in Kenya for many years. He says the port is evidence of a top-down mindset from central government, with little local consultation, and the economic conditions to make it a success don't yet exist.
So you unload your materials, and where do you take them? You don't have the infrastructure to Ethiopia or to South Sudan yet. You don't have the demand. The main economic logic for the port was the oil.
He says when it was on the drawing board, the Lamu project looked much more promising than it does today. Uganda left the project in favour of linking its oil infrastructure with Tanzania. Ethiopia is more focused on the port in Djibouti than one in Kenya, and the promised oil pipeline from South Sudan has been jeopardised by internal conflict and low oil prices.
We're going to a post-oil economy. You have a lot of electricity coming into the region, and that I don't think is going to emerge as the economic driver of the port. When it was originally conceived, perhaps, but it run into a lot of flack on a lot of these issues, even the kind of oil, the kind of pipeline, because the oil is very sludgy. It's clean, but it's very thick and needs to be heated. So there's a lot of technical issues. Ethiopia was very interested in getting kind of free infrastructure connection because they don't have access to the sea since Eritrea became independent. But now Berbera is probably going to take over that role in some other places, Djibouti, Berbera, and that provides them an alternative route to the sea for exports and imports for Ethiopia, which was the big, fast-moving economy in the region until the Tigrayan situation.
There are other concerns about this project that go beyond it being a potential white elephant. Famau Shukri is from the Lamu Marine Conservation Trust.
The port is the big environmental degradation in terms of all the marine lives and also the mangroves. You know, the mangroves, these are they act like breeding grounds for the fishes and everything. So they have destroyed the grounds feeding of fish, and once they were doing the dredging, most of the corals were silted.
So you're very disappointed about the port project?
I have very negative thoughts with the coming ports, to me, as environmentalist, one. Two, since Lamu is a UNESCO site, for me, why do we need a big port? It's totally environmental degradation. They are talking about the fishermen. The fishermen also, they are being very much affected. They have not even been compensated yet.
The mangroves Famau mentions are another important part of the Lamu marine environment. There are miles and miles of dense mangrove forests. These trees are vital habitats for sea creatures and birds, and crucially, valuable carbon sinks. So could they too be at threat from the huge cargo ships soon to be moving in and out of this region? Atwa Salim is also from the Lamu Marine Conservation Trust. Atwa, we're sitting on a dhow, a very traditional wooden boat here in Lamu, and we've just sailed up at sunset to this channel where all we can see are mangroves.
Yes.
Tell us how important these trees are to Lamu.
Lamu is hosting 70% of the mangrove forest in the entire country. So this is amazing. And we as the community, we are really taking care of it. We are protecting it because it's the foraging area. It's an area which is acting as a soil erosion near the banks. And it's really important. The birds, it really play a very important role also on the colonization and, of course, honey harvesting. And at the same time, crab farming.
And what about the mangroves' value as carbon sinks? Because this is something that's really starting to become more of a mainstream idea now, that we have to protect mangrove forests all around the world because they do so well at storing carbon.
This mangrove cleans up the air, takes down the carbon, and we are really playing an important role at the global level.
What about the new port that's just been constructed? Many container ships are going to be coming in and out of that deep sea port in the next few months. Does that pose any risk to this special environment, not just of the mangrove forests, but also Lamu town, which is a UNESCO heritage site?
Definitely, the impacts are, of course, going to be positive and both negative on the environment. But, of course, port has already affected the area. Some mangrove have been cut down because of the concrete. And the only way is, If you cut one tree, plant 10 trees. This is an equation in place. It is only through the way whereby equilibrium position takes place whereby this pot can have a benefit. If the mitigation measures are not going to be put in place squarely, then we will suffer.
Atwa Salim from the Lamu Marine Conservation Trust, ending that report by Vivienne Nunes. That's all we've got time for today. The show is produced by Matthew Davis and edited by John Bithry. We'll all be back same time next week. Until then, thanks for being with us. Goodbye.
The Americans are out, the Taliban in. A generation's work, the dreams of so many, shattered in days.
As we speak, there's Taliban right at my doorstep.
I can't believe the world abandoned Afghanistan. Our friends are going to get killed. They're going to kill us.
In our new podcast, you'll hear from people whose lives have shaped Afghanistan, who wished for and worked for different futures.
I think the biggest mistake that we made as Afghans was to feel that there was somebody else who will take care of everything for us.
A Wish for Afghanistan from the BBC World Service.
Everyone else has the luxury to pack and go. We can't. And we did not create this mess on our own.
Search for A Wish for Afghanistan with me, Lise Doucette, wherever you get your podcasts.